Okay, so I just finished part 2. I read the interludes before part 3, which puts me at page 376 of Words of Radiance, and some crazy things happened in the last section. So another herald appears. We had our 2 main protagonists meet for the first time, or as far as I know, the first time. And we also had Surge Binders fighting for the first time, or what I think is the first time as well. So there's a lot to get through. So let's talk about it. The first thing I read is a flashback, another flashback of Shallan, and it's 5 years ago. Her mother is already dead, and we're kind of seeing the fallout of her family because of this murder. And I think that either Shallan did it, and I'm leaning towards Shallan doing it, or the other man in the room did it, and not her father, for reasons I discussed in previous videos. And in this scene, what we see is we see her walk past her father's room. She knows the lockbox is hidden behind, like, I think a painting potentially, and she can see this like shining thing. And I don't know if no one else can see it, but her brother definitely can't see it. So it must have something to do with her abilities and powers. And she says her mother's soul is in the box previously. Like what's in that lockbox basically. So it got me thinking, maybe it wasn't a shard blade that killed her mother. Maybe I was being pointed in that direction. The same way I was being pointed that her father killed her mother. So because she was like turned upside down, so I just assumed her eyes were burnt out. Maybe what actually happened was nobody had a shard blade there, because her father was very surprised when her oldest brother did have a shard blade, and we had no mention of her father having a shard blade as far as I know. So maybe it wasn't the fact that she had a shard blade then, because that would be a bit strange. Maybe she soul cast. Maybe she soul cast her mother's soul, hence the name, into something else, and that something else was then inside the box. So that's my guess. And I was thinking, like, why would she then not understand how to soul cast later with Yasna, and didn't know she could do it, and didn't really know how soul casting worked, and was surprised to see it. But she'd completely blocked out her own memories, so that would kind of line up. So back to modern day, and Shallan meets Kaladin. They're close to the camp, and the meeting is wholly unsatisfactory because of partially Shallan, but mainly Tin. So Tin decides that they're going to start lying immediately, and she makes Shallan put on this unreasonable horny-to accent. Kaladin sees through it, but is also a bit stranged out by this whole process, and basically what it does is very similar to what Shallan's done the entire duration of the story, is puts her in a lie immediately and makes it really difficult for people to trust her. And it's so frustrating because, like back with Yasna, if she'd have told the truth, not immediately, but later on, then she would have been in a much better position. The same with Kaladin, almost immediately, and because of that, probably the same with the other Alethi high princes and anyone who matters moving into the Shattered Plains. And it's just so frustrating to see. And you sit there and you listen to Tin and Shallan planning, and I start to think, do I really like Shallan? I don't know. But then that all changes in pretty much the next scene. So we get a scene where Tin and Shallan are sitting there. Shallan's basically thinking, what on earth have I gotten myself into here? I can't believe how her situation has changed so quickly, and this Tin woman's going to be trouble, and she's already been trouble because she looks like a fool in front of Kaladin. And then through the span read, or the read span, potentially, can't remember the name of that thing, but where basically you can communicate over long distances, it becomes clear that Tin's employers are the Ghost Bloods, and she had a heavy hand in the murder of Yasna, or what we think was the murder of Yasna. I'm not convinced. And obviously Shallan's deal, and a lot of the people she knows being murdered, and they go at it, and Shallan finally summons her shard blade and sticks Tin with it, and it was very, very satisfying. So what next for that storyline? A lot of awkwardness. It's going to be interesting to see how she integrates. Will she use the shard blades, her ability as a Radiant, or her scholarly knowledge of what's really going on? Like, she has a lot of weapons and tools and leverage, so I think obviously she's going to be okay, but it's going to be a bit awkward to begin with. But the main question is, who is the Ghost Blood that she's going to meet? And I think we have 3 options. Number 1, brand new character, somebody a bit anonymous in the camp, keeping a low profile. 2 would be someone important that we already know, like an Alethi High Prince. And then number 3 would be someone that we know who isn't that important. And what I'm leaning towards is number 3. I don't think an Alethi High Prince would be running the Ghost Bloods. I don't know why, but I mean, although the Alethi seem to war with each other, they do seem quite straightforwards. And that's probably just an oversimplification based on the fact that I haven't seen Alethi interact with a bunch of other people or them outside of their obsession with their own politics other than trying to murder Parshendi. But yeah, my instincts say that the Alethi are quite simple. So the third option is somebody that we don't know very well, or that we've met but we don't know very well and isn't that important. And the first thing that springs to mind are 2 kind of characters who are in it and interesting, but not very prominent. Like we know there's more to know about them. Those 2 characters, one is Moash, because of how suspicious Kaladin's been of him, and there's more evidence for him, and I'll talk about that later. Or the Ardent. So there was a strange interaction with an Ardent that I think it was Dalinar had, or maybe it was Adolin, I can't remember, but it was an Ardent in the middle of doing negotiations, and yeah, it was just a strange one. And I made a mental note that like that's going to be an important character later. So my guess would be one of those 2, or just somebody else that maybe we've met before but isn't that important in the camp. So on to our meat and potatoes of this section. Kaladin, Dalinar, Adolin versus Zeph. And oh, Stormfather, it was fantastic. I had such a good time reading it. And it was amazing to see these characters cross paths, especially considering we just had Shallan and Kaladin cross paths and it was wholly unsatisfactory. So to see these guys go at it, and just so much was implied from this battle. And the most important thing that was implied was, well, there was a couple of things. Number 1, Kaladin was able to reform himself after being cut by a shard blade. So there's some implications from that. And I just thought of that as I'm doing the video. So I don't know what the implications could be. Spren blade. No, not sure. But there are some implications from that. But more importantly, Zeph's reaction to Kaladin before they part is really interesting. So first of all, when Zeph is about to appear, Syl says that he is, I'm going to have to quote it, the one who hates with darkness inside him, and then no spren guides him. So no spren guides him is confusing. And then once they part ways and he realizes that Kaladin is a Radiant of some sort, here's what Zeph says. He says, and he looks horrified and outraged. He says, "They told me I was a liar." And then he said, "Are they all back?" And they also something along the lines of like, they cast me out as truthless. They made, so there's a lot to digest there, and obviously it's difficult. So let's talk about the first thing. The first thing Syl says is he's got hatred within him and no spren guides him. 2 things I could think of. Number 1, was he a herald? Because I would assume no sprens are inside the heralds. So was he maybe one of the heralds? I don't know, but potentially. The other thing I guessed was later on, and I don't want to ruin a bit later in the video, but I need to bring it up. So we see Eshonai, I think her name is, the Parshendi who we're following. Basically, a hate spren bonds with her, and she gets a power form. And we'll talk about that later, because that's amazing. Maybe Zeph got a hate spren inside of him, and I would guess maybe Syl doesn't consider those hate sprens because they're sprens of odium. So maybe they have a completely different name. So that was another guess. So maybe he's a herald. They don't need sprens. And he does hold an honor blade, but I don't think it's his. And then more likely, I think one of those hatred spren were inside of him. And the thing was like, so whatever he lied about, it would appear is true, because he said whatever he was branded a liar about, it would appear is actually true, because he said like, oh, they told me I was a liar, like as if he was frustrated because he thought he was telling the truth at the time, and it turns out he is. So Kaladin's existence would insinuate that he wasn't lying. So what did he believe, or what was he saying to be true? So I think he was already branded a truthless before the murder of Gavilar, which kind of destroys the theory I had in my head. So the theory I had in my head was that he has an honor blade, because it's mentioned that his blade could bring him more light than the shard blade, and it was slightly different, so my guess would be that it was an honor blade. In the prologue of this book, the Alethi man says that creature has our master's blade, so maybe that Alethi guy works for one of the actual heralds. So my theory was that Zeph says that he was asked by a herald to kill Gavilar, and that's when they're like, no, truthless, and he gets dispelled, if that's even a word, expelled, that's for school, exiled from the Shin. But I don't think the timeline matches up, because I think he was already truthless. Confusing, but exciting. The only other thing I could think of is maybe the only other way people seem to get like interesting powers or abilities is from the Night Watcher. So I don't know if maybe he asked for something from the Night Watcher, and then that doesn't really add up with any of the rest of the story. So no, maybe I'm onto something, I don't know. Read and find out, as everybody says. So what is happening elsewhere while these two are battling? Well, Moash acts very strange, and I can't remember exactly what made me think that, but I think something about like when Kaladin was like, go, we got to get out of here now, we got to flee, and he was holding the spears weird, or something made me think, I should have written it down, something made me think, oh, Moash is acting weird. So either, number one, he has been turned and he was in on the assassination attempt, and he is the Ghostblood, well, at least the Ghostblood like messenger boy in the camp, or maybe he's writing the numbers because there were numbers on the wall. So that's another option. So onto the interludes. Eshonai heads out into the storms to become a power, to find a power form, or a form of power. And on the journey out there, she's doing like a self monologue, and her monologue makes me think that the Stormfather is not Odium, as I've guessed this entire duration. And if you mix what I learned from her little monologue and then from Kaladin's vision, where he's riding the storm, he is the Stormfather, or riding the storm, and he turns around and looks behind him, and there's a big red cloud, and that is Odium. So that's different to the Stormfather. Cultivation can't be the Stormfather, because cultivation is female, and we know that from the vision, and Almighty says that cultivation, she was better at this, something along those lines. The Almighty isn't, we know that already. Almighty is honor, and Odium isn't. Therefore, the Stormfather must be something different, and that makes me think the Stormfather is some kind of big spren, because that would make sense as to why Kaladin can ride, because he's like a wind spren. You see where I'm going with this? Some kind of big spren, or something completely different. But spren seem to be the only other thing with power, and there are some powerful spren, like the Night Watcher's a spren, as far as we know. So maybe the Stormfather's a spren as well, and maybe some other anomalies in the world of spren also. So that's my guess. I've been calling Odium the Stormfather for a long time, but I take that back. And so she breaks open the I think it's a gem heart, right? And inside is not what she thought. It's a hatred spren. The hatred spren bonds with her, and she doesn't want to, but then she gets the form of power and she becomes a storm form. And so does she become a void bringer, or does she become like the opposite of a Knight's Radiant? I think she becomes the opposite of a Knight's Radiant. So what are like the opposite of Heralds? I'm not sure, but yeah, she is now a certified killer, badass, I should say. However, she does seem to have lost the ability to decide what she needs to do. She seems to now be under the influence of, I would guess, Odium, or at the very least, Voidbringers, if she is not now a Voidbringer. And I think we're about to get a storyline that's going to be relatively similar to one from Mistborn. So in Mistborn, Kelsier's brother has a very unfortunate storyline. His name is Moash, but he ends up becoming, well, is one of the heroes of the story. But his storyline is very much, he's on the inside, you know, he's our agent on the inside, but he's having an awful time for the duration because his mind is essentially not his own and he's under the influence of ruin. And I think we're about to get a similar inside job storyline from Eshonai. So what comes next from her? I would guess the meeting that goes down in 7 days isn't very friendly, and she probably goes at it with maybe Kaladin or Dalinar or somebody, and I would guess that she probably gets the best of them and stops any peace talks because everyone's like, oh no, the Parshendi have discovered whatever that is. In the other interludes, we discover that, I think Zahir is a Herald. I think it would be very unlikely if he's not a Herald. So that's our second Herald that we know of. And also Town arrives, I think, at the Shattered Plains it is. And his Honor Blade is there as well. So I'm looking forward to the interaction between Zahir and Town, because surely Town has hatred, rage, and vengeance inside of him. And I mean, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't have hatred, revenge, and all that inside of them? Or maybe he doesn't even know of the betrayal because that place that you go to is so horrible that you don't realize if anyone else is there with you. So he might not even know of the betrayal of those individuals. And then obviously the Spren felt like they betrayed everybody else because those oath takers became oath breakers. So what will they think of the Heralds returning? I don't know. Many questions. So what extra stuff did we get? We get a head note that says that the Heralds shattered the plains. So it was them who shattered the plains. Why did they do that? What is so important about this city that is buried? I'm not sure, but that's something to bear in mind, especially considering the Ghostbloods now have some very important information about the city below the Shattered Plains, and Yasna's hot on their tails, and the actual Heralds who did the shattering, a couple of them are there as well. So that storyline is going to come to a head. Something else is that the poems that I'm getting are so descriptive, and yet I still can't glean much information from them. It's very, very, very frustrating. So I don't really know what's going on, even though it's very fun to read those poems. And once I'm done with the book and if I go back and do a reread, I'm sure I'm going to look at those poems and be like, you fool, how could you not get it from those poems? Another thought I had was, we keep on getting somebody writing numbers on the wall. And could it be Moash? Maybe. I had a suspicion, maybe Moash, this is a guess out of left field, but is there a small chance that Moash is a Parshendi who discovered smoke form or mist form, or one of the forms that was described as like their way of properly spying, and maybe it turns you look completely like something else, basically like the Parshendi version or Voidbringer version of Shallan's light weaving ability, but like permanent. So that would be interesting. So he's writing the numbers on the wall. Or is there a chance that the storm is coming from our side? Because if it's Dalinar writing it on the walls, well, I just assumed it was coming from the Parshendi side. But maybe it's our side that's going to bring the storm down. We have, we don't really have Zeph on our side, but we have Kaladin. So, you know, he has some ability with the winds. Maybe when he reaches that next plateau of whatever oaths he has to take, he can bring down a storm. So I'm doing all this assuming the storm's coming from the Parshendi side. And those odds have definitely increased because we now have storm form, and I'm sure some other one will go and get storm form as well. So don't get me wrong, those odds have increased, but potentially the storm's coming from our side because maybe Dalinar's writing the numbers. So something to consider. And something that I want to double down on. So I think that Shallan is going to be extremely important in the redemption of the Parshendi. So I think storm form is obviously fills the Parshendi full of hatred, or a hatred spren, and they talk a lot about how the spren abandoned the Parshendi. I don't know why they would do that, but I think that the spren can go into a Parshendi. I think one of the head notes said that, like a regular spren can do it if they hadn't abandoned them. I think that Shallan will be very key to helping them rediscover art form or creation form, or whatever form they were trying to figure out by doing the art. I think she will show them how to do that, and I think that's going to be maybe the absolution of Shallan and the Parshendi, maybe even at the end of this book. So lots of predictions, lots has gone down, but most importantly, now I've done the video, I can get back to reading, which is the best bit. So I'll see you guys next Sunday, 10 a.m. Central Time. Please like and subscribe.
Yes.